Maybe it's just my, 30 plus years in the profession to, I don't need to put up with that crap.
To me, that's like the highest level of developing a culture, is where students not only set boundaries, but let other students know what those boundaries are in a safe way.
The two words that he always said every day was constructive criticism.
A culture takes time to create. It doesn't just happen.
Just because they're in the same space doesn't mean that they're going to create a learning environment of respect and inclusiveness.
And you're going to be managing your class, or worse, your class is going to be managing you.
Because I think that's a great way to get students experimenting and feeling more safe about it.
They see the Chicago Bears bed sheets, like, oh, you're a Bears fan. I'm so sorry.
It's more of the Mr. Miyagi type of teaching.
Welcome, physical educators. This is Thinking PE.
Because FIED is more than just fun and games.
I'm Stacy Nelson.
And I'm Jamie Seneca.
And it's our goal to dig deeper beyond the activities that make your class awesome.
So buckle up and join us on this journey.
Welcome to another edition of Thinking PE. This afternoon here, as we're talking, Jamie, I just kind of wanted to focus on something that you've brought up before. You've been really trying to focus in your classroom this year on developing a culture. And you were very purposeful in that. You're very specific with it. And I believe, let me just try to word it right and you tell me how I'm doing here. You wanted to create like a culture where kids feel safe trying new things, where it's okay to make mistakes. Am I on the right track there? Or would you say about that? And how
that's absolutely, I'll say that's absolutely spot on, is the culture as we're face-to-face in the gym at this point. But as we're face-to-face in the gym, one of the things I wanted to create, keeping that social emotional learning in mind, was making it all right for kids to make mistakes, where it's a safe environment, where emotionally that they're willing to try new things. And I just think that's really, really important. And I found you have to be very deliberate in that approach and give examples and act, teach what does it look like to encourage somebody that's struggling. And as goofy as that sounds, it's like anything. It has to be taught. Examples have to be given. You have to put the students in a position where they have an opportunity to practice that. And then I am constant. That is something I'm looking for, maybe more so than the actual skills, right, wrong, or indifferent, but is looking for those students that are doing that and then acknowledging it as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you sound very purposeful. You've thought this out. We've had many discussions around it, and I've thought this before that. I'm like, don't tell me your culture. Don't tell me what you think your culture is, what you want your culture is. If I walked in your gym in 10 minutes, I bet I could tell what your culture is. Do you think that would be reflected right now if I walked in and watched your gym for a class period? Do you think I would see that and that would be reflected, or is it not quite developed at that point yet?
And I think one thing we'll hear throughout this podcast is it takes time. It takes time. It takes patience. And I think what you would see is the purposeful approach that I'm taking to create that culture. And no, we're not as all classes K through 5. We're not there yet. Okay. And the key word there is yet. But I do have comfort knowing I can see that culture starting to develop, where I'm starting to see more students and hear more students acknowledging each other and allowing each other to make mistakes, helping other students. That's when one of our learning targets just this week was, I can adapt to ensure others have fun. And the key there was, I can adapt. How are you changing your game or changing the game in order that your partner or your group, so that everybody can have fun?
That's awesome. I really hope that catches on for you and you really gain momentum with that and have more and more stories to share on the podcast. And just for yourself, just because that's such a great atmosphere to have in a classroom. I think that's very worthwhile energy you're pouring in and being purposeful as you're doing it. And it fits well. The reason I asked you about it is it fits so well into what we're going to talk about with this whole discussion with several teachers from around the country here, where we're talking about culture again. We're diving in, and you're going to see kind of this theme of, you got to be purposeful. You've got to be thoughtful. You've got to kind of think about this up front, because if you don't, some culture is going to develop in your classroom. If you don't think about it, it still will develop. There will be a culture, but are you going to be purposeful like you're doing in doing that? So this first segment, I asked the question of the group, what's the difference between classroom culture and classroom management? Because Dr. Christy O'Malley kind of presented that to us as a bit of a starting point of how to distinguish between the two, and it really made for a good launching point for this discussion. So let's take a listen. When we say that there's a difference between classroom culture and classroom management, what would be the difference? Anything up front come to your mind?
In my mind, I feel like classroom management is more dependent on teacher by teacher, where I think that culture is something that can last beyond just that teacher. So I work I sub as a paraprofessional, and some days, or when I worked regularly as a paraprofessional, there would be days where the teacher would be gone and they'd have a substitute. And some of the classrooms, they stayed fairly similar. That culture, I thought, was really strong, where it would be normally good where the teacher would manage the classroom well, but the culture maybe wasn't as strong. And then it'd go a little chaotic when you had a sub. And then there's other classrooms where I feel like the culture was very strong. And so even when that teacher was gone, they still had that culture, keeping the classroom together, even though it wasn't the same teacher.
That's interesting. Trying to think of when we see all the kids in my building. I see every kid, so I see every different teacher's group, and there are some things that relate to what you were saying there, Britton. There are some things that when some teachers, when they're gone, I have to manage the class different, and other teachers, when they're gone, they're just kind of part of their culture that the kids.
You don't even realize that they're gone.
Yeah, is that what you were saying, Britton, or did I misunderstand a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to communicate. I guess it totally depends on how you define each of those, but in my mind, that's how I'd understand both of those phrases.
I think along the same line, one of the things that goes with this is, like, I had a principal ask me one day, he goes, "How am I going to know you have good classroom management?" And I said, "Pull me out in the hallway and talk to me anytime you want to. My class is not going to fall apart." And that ability, as a coach, that was one of the things that room had to operate all the time when I was gone as a coach.
Yeah.
It couldn't fall apart. And there are teachers, and I've run into them, that you have basically the same set of kids the year before that were great, and now they're awful. And I do lay some of that on the classroom teacher, because it's the environment those kids are in every day before they come to us.
Yeah. I like what Christy said here in the chat. She kind of distinguishes the management is kind of what the teachers, she said, doing to the students, and more about having them comply to what your instructions are, that type of thing. But the culture is more having to do with the student needs, the student interests, the differences between students, and that kind of thing. I like that as a foundation for the definition. Any thoughts on those?
That's actually where I've personally been really struggling in this environment that we're in now, is that proactive piece, because I rely so heavily on facial expressions, and just with where I'm at, kids are wearing masks, and we are wearing masks too. So for me, it's real difficult to look across the gym and see that kid's facial expression, whether it's one of struggling or one of joy. And I find myself being more reactive versus the proactive.
Okay.
Yeah, the feedback is way slower. Even same thing with online, right?
And I would even say the other, I think the kids struggle too. I've got to be more animated, because they can't read my facial expressions either when I'm excited for them to energize what they're doing.
Sue, anything come to your mind as you're listening to this?
Well, I think the main struggle spot for DAPE teachers, and probably general PE teachers too right now, is that community. And so thinking about children with disabilities who have typically uh, opportunities for support on a lot of different levels. Think about all of the support that some students with disabilities need in a school setting, and now they have none through this virtual learning. It's very hard for them probably to even think about learning because their whole system is brand new, and there's not really um, that support. I mean, I'm hoping there's parent support, but we don't know. We don't know what their home life is like and how folks at home are able to do those support things. And so I'm sure it's a nightmare for a lot of families. And that, of course, makes the thought of culture crazy to me, because how do you create a culture when you don't have any support at home?
I'm going to throw out this sentence and I want you to react to it. It's management is reactive and culture is proactive.
I would add, the culture is inclusive versus management is exclusive as well, to kind of dive into that a little.
Yeah, because I don't think you can exclusively say that, obviously, and I don't think that's what Christy was trying to do here, is totally separate the definitions. But from a starting point to conversation point, I think it's a great place to start. Is we talked about some of those teachers that if you're just reacting all the time and you haven't thought about what you're going to do to set up the culture, then you're going to be behind the eight ball, so to speak, and you're going to be managing your class, or worse, your class is going to be managing you, which is often how it feels. I have one teacher who was at school for 2 days, and then she had to go. She got pulled out because her daughter was potentially exposed to somebody, and so she's been there virtually sometimes and not others. Well, basically, this class has been having subs come in regularly, switch in and out, and there's been no regularity at all. And boy, can I tell.
I think that the proactive piece is huge, particularly when you match it with Stacy, your comment in the chat box about it being intentional and it requires planning. So, we think the newest movement is unified PE. So having a physical education class that's half students with disabilities and half students without disabilities. And the thought of it is just a class. It's not peers helping students without, with and without disabilities. It's just everybody's on the same page. It's not a class system, but the teacher definitely has to be intentional in his or her planning to make sure that the culture is one where everybody knows that we're here to learn and that everybody's at a different step in their learning. And it's my job as the teacher to plan appropriate activities for everybody to learn from the standpoint of wherever that we are. And I think that culture sometimes is misconstrued, where in this concept of unified physical education, it goes back to this class system where, oh, you have a disability. I'm here in the class to help you. I'm the non-disabled student, and I'm here to help you. Let me help you do that. Not that we shouldn't help our classmates, because we all need help at some point or other. But if the culture is created where that's the role of those students without disabilities in this unified PE class, then I think we haven't really created an inclusive culture. We've just brought two groups of people together, and half of them are going to help the other ones, and that's where we are in that particular movement. And so I think we have to be careful about how we're going to intentionally create culture for all students.
That's a really good thought. Christy, you were going to say something. I don't know if it was related to that or maybe a different.
The idea of reactive, a good teacher still needs to be able to react. You know, a good teacher needs to be able to read the environment and react to the situation. I think just when I was learning how to be a teacher, I learned all about this thing called assertive discipline and how it was all about, I don't know if anybody, the rest of you remember assertive discipline. When a child made a mistake or was naughty, you wrote their name on the board. The next time they were naughty, you put it. So it was very public display. And to me, management's just always gotten this bad taste. And so I think sometimes it's the word that makes it sound bad. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out with my students, you know, let's think about it as what you do in advance, what you do intentionally, what you plan in advance. And that a culture takes time to create. It doesn't just happen.
No, I like that.
Just because they're in the same space doesn't mean that they're going to create a learning environment of respect and inclusiveness, right? That's where our job has to be, to help mold and form and question and provide opportunities for them to learn about themselves. And then if I learn about myself and what it means in terms of my values, how can I then go out into my culture of physical education class or a DAPE class and then be more accepting of others in my culture. But oftentimes, you know, we don't spend much time, if any, on that purposeful kind of tasks. We just put them all together and we've got 30 minutes, so let's get moving. We don't have time to do any of that culture creating. And so we just end up no better off or no place different than where we started. So thinking about, it's going to take some work on our part as a teacher to purposefully create opportunities for students to develop culture.
Hey, Stacy, I have to tell you, it's really refreshing to have Sutar, one of the leaders in the DAPE community here in the state of Minnesota, to bring that DAPE perspective to our discussion of building a culture.
Absolutely. And everything she said throughout the whole discussion, it related from that point of view. I just love, it was refreshing to hear that side of things. And it was really, I think it was important for us as a community to be reminded of that, especially like this culture, when you're forming what you want your class to be like, hearing her perspective on that. I think it was just super, super refreshing and super important for our PE community to hear.
You know, and especially those teachers that aren't the DAPE teachers at their school. Maybe you have a traveling DAPE teacher, that you can take that collaborative approach to building a culture for, again, we use that term, all students. Well, that's a collaborative approach to build that community or build that culture for all students.
Yeah. I also appreciated Christy's comments in there talking about when you're building a culture, it takes time. It doesn't come overnight. And it's not like teachers don't have to react. I mean, that wasn't the purpose of trying to come up with a definition, is to define things in and out. It was just to kind of give us somewhere to start. And it does. It takes time. You have to be purposeful in thinking about what do you want to include. And that's why, you know, having that idea about DAPE, if you don't think about it, it probably won't just appear. If you don't think about having kids on equal status, so to speak, in your classroom, you might just think, oh, it's great to have kids helping the DAPE students. And it's not like that's not good, but that's not really the whole culture you want to develop, is creating an atmosphere where these DAPE students are dependent on other students.
Well, and I really like that you need to be able to react. And to me, that's just so important, that you can have a mission, and you can train for it, you can plan for it, you can rehearse for it, you can gather intelligence for it. But at the end of the day, when you conduct that mission, you still have to be able to react to what's going on. And same thing in our teaching, we can take as many proactive measures and practice and go through trainings and be proactive in our teaching, but you still need to be able to react to those kiddos that may be struggling.
Yeah. But on the other side of that, there still is that part we talked a lot about is that purposeful planning.
Mhm.
Because without that, you're just
They
you're
go hand
dancing,
in
you know,
hand.
and reacting, and that's not a fun lifestyle for a teacher to be reacting
Not at
all the
all.
time. So in this next section, I had asked the group, what are some of those things that you want to purposely put in? And so this led to some very interesting discussions. Let's take a listen.
Taking the time to have students get to know each other. And so if I know something about you, I might be more apt to invite you or include you in anything in the school, whether it be sitting with you at the lunch table or whatever it might be. So taking time to have students build relationships with each other. So that could be through a walk and talk for a warm up, where you have some targeted specific questions that they meet a person today and they're walking around doing their warm up and they're having these conversations, asking these purposeful questions of their classmates. And, the next time they meet another classmate, that would be one simple way to get to know who your classmates are. Oftentimes we show up to the gym, we get on our spots, we do our warm-ups, there's no talking, we listen to instruction, and then away we go, and typically we end up in our cliques, our groups of people that we already know. And so there's no real time or opportunity to learn about other kids in our class.
Yeah. I think Christy mentioned last week that she likes those this or that's, where kids are forced to just pick peanut butter or jelly, whatever it is, and they can look around and see, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. There's other kids that like jelly too. That type of a idea. I thought that was really unique statement she made last week. Go along with this.
Actually, I have a really good example from my high school experience for like how a culture was created. So it was my my strength and conditioning course. So I'll actually reference, it was the teacher who did this was phenomenal. It was Dr. John Bierbauer at McHenry High School, if you want to look him up. That was his first thing every time, was having that culture, because especially with a strength and conditioning, like a weightlifting course, I knew, especially me, sometimes I felt like I was, I looked terrible when I couldn't complete my lift. I couldn't get it to that, the correct weight. And it was this class where we are not heated, but it was the entire class where we were basically built up to support each other. So it was, when you saw somebody and they were like, oh, they're about to hit their new max, everybody was like gathering around. They were like cheering them on. They hit it. Everyone was high-fiving and hugging. They were cheering them on. If they did make it, hey, you know what? You got it. You'll get it next time. You got this. And we actually had this thing. It was called the Warrior of the Week, because of course we were the McHenry Warriors, and I'm yet still a Warrior. So we had this like mock WWE belt. And so it was the person who not only put the most effort into the class, but also was the most proactive student. They were the ones, they got their lifts done, so they were helping out their partner, and they were cheering on other people, so they would win the belt for the week. They were the most proactive student. I think that really helped out the culture, is that everyone wasn't on their own. They, like you said, they weren't, just in their own stations doing their own work. They were, it was, it wasn't just your partners too, just, partners on the benches. It was an entire family as a class that, everyone was, just helping each other out when they were down, cheering them on when they were up. And I think it was just a fantastic culture that was created just because we were not only because we were wanting to be active, but we were wanting to help each other be active.
Can you recall what he did to create that? Because that's great, but I can see where somebody else, maybe me, I try it and I get some smart aleck kids, and and 80% of the kids are cheering you on, and then you get some smart aleck kids and they snicker under their breath and
I could.
What did he do to get everybody on board and do such a great job with that?
I think even though, because my school, we didn't have like the block scheduling, so we only had about 30 to 40 minutes to to be a part of the class. And he would still take that 5 minutes at the beginning of every class to discuss. And I know the two words that he always said every day was constructive criticism. He was huge about, just because we are trying to help you does not mean we are trying to bring you down. It's like he was always talking about how to build your discussion as a way to improve, not as a way to tear somebody down. So it wasn't, oh man, you suck, you couldn't get you couldn't get the bench press up. It was always like, hey, I saw what you did there. Maybe we should bring it down 5 pounds. Just check your elbows when you're lifting. I think you can do this. I think you can really get it next time. So he was able to take the time, even if it was just 5 minutes, he was always like, okay, like, let's just talk about the class. How's everyone feeling? It was always the class first, and then we would jump into the activity.
Good.
I gotta double down on that, Ben, because that's the exact kind of culture that I'm trying to create, where kids are celebrating each other's accomplishments and helping each other. And it ties right into Britton had a comment here where students feel safe to take chances and experiment. And that's the culture I'm really trying to create in my gym, where we're trying to celebrate our students' successes, but also allowing each other to make mistakes and encouraging each other through that process, so that when they do succeed, then we have success. And Sue, I have to have you elaborate on being able to call each other on their stuff, because that is that really hit home with the Marine Corps there, except for that politely part.
Well, never having been in the service, I mean, it can be, impolite.
But I'm very curious on that, because I recognize the importance of being able to call stuff out. So please expand on that.
Well, I just, and I don't know how, so much how it might work in public school, but, I think in our profession and in higher ed, it seems to be easier for me to say, is that really accurate, or is that really who you are, or really who you want to be? Or I mean, and maybe it's just my 30 plus years in the profession to, I don't need to put up with that crap, nor should we have to put up with that crap.
And I would say, if we're going to put that on like a similar thing of like the Bloom's taxonomy, to me, that's like the highest level of developing a culture, is where students not only set boundaries, but let other students know what those boundaries are in a safe way. So again, not only I got my feelings hurt because you crossed my boundary, but now I'm going to let you know that now I'm going to hurt your feelings in the process. And it's kind of like well, that didn't accomplish anything. It's kind of like yelling at your kid, telling them not to yell at their brother and sister. It doesn't really accomplish anything. So, but I really consider that's like the highest level of somewhere I would like to get.
Or the thought of, it's safe to say my feelings, right? That whole thought about, oftentimes we just hold everything inside, and you could irritate the crap out of me. And I never let you know, and I'm going to hold this, big old grudge against you and bully you and all of these things. When if I just told you that what you said, Jamie, hurt my feelings, maybe you didn't know it. So now you know it, and hopefully you don't ever do it again. I mean, I think our culture on a lot of different levels needs to be able to have those kinds of.
And that's a deep skill set. That's a deep
very
that, like anything, needs to be taught. And that we've discussed in other discussions here about the importance of social emotional learning, and how do we apply that in Phi Ed, and bingo, right there's one of the ways.
Yeah, because if we haven't created a culture of acceptance, no way am I going to throw my feelings out on the table, because people will just eat it up. Mm-hmm. And they will never be kind to me, and I don't even stand a chance. So I will never, let my guard down. I will always have a wall up if I don't feel it's a safe environment for me to share those feelings on whatever level. And so I think, we can do better, and I think we need to do better as teachers, not just physical educators, but all teachers.
And that just looks way different at different levels. Being at the college level compared to elementary. I'm thinking of, is it Ben Landers that has the Jamie, you're gonna have to help me with this. Conflict corner, is that what he calls it?
Yes.
And he's had kids practice this. They have a corner with a poster, and if he has two kids that are in conflict, instead of coming to the teacher, he sends them to this corner where they go through a chart, and he's had them all practice this. That's the idea. You can't just have a poster in a corner, but they go through where both kids get to share their piece. Hey, you hurt my feelings, and the other kid gets to respond, well, you stole my ball, or that idea. They walk through it, and then I don't remember all the steps, but the big point Ben was saying was that it cuts down on the number of things he has to deal with as a teacher, and then it puts it in their hands. It creates a safe environment to share, because that's where we both go and share our feelings, and then we work it out, and then we can come back in. Instead of having two people tattle, and then the teacher just scolds one and takes care of it, and now nothing's really solved, except for we both know that the teacher's in charge, and I'm just going to do it without the teacher noticing next time. And so I don't know, that's one idea that came to my mind of a place or a way to, at the elementary, to make that feeling come across, and able to share your feelings.
Well, I think it's a great point, Stacey, just in the fact that how much of our time is spent mediating those interactions, when it would be awesome if we could teach those kids to be able to explain their feelings to each other and call each other out on that.
Yeah.
And not escalate it.
That's a huge point. Yeah.
I think you hit it when you were talking about emotions. I just don't think we were never taught that it was okay to show your emotion. We were never taught how to regulate our emotions or our behaviors. We were taught to hold our emotions in. I actually talked about this today in class with these two guys. If you've never read Mark Brackett's book on Permission to Feel, I think it's a book that all teachers should really read. He has some wonderful ways of thinking about how you help kids recognize that it's okay how they're feeling. And so I just think it takes time to build relationships, and you have to be really, it has to be intentional. Like I wrote over there, I think it's important that teachers show their humanness. I don't know, but I think it's all people need work on all of this. None of us were taught how to do any of this.
Yeah, I agree. And some of it is pure personality differences, and even the culture we grew up in. I grew up in a very Swedish atmosphere where the Swedes, there's a stereotype about Swedes for a reason. They're stoic. You don't show your emotions, that type of a thing. So, and the different places we grew up with, that's that culture again that we grow up in. So you're dealing with that with kids too, and with adults. Even in our own building, think of your own staffs. We probably don't deal with it great. There's a lot of those pent up feelings and that kind of stuff. So, no.
One thing that I feel like I've seen a little bit in college classes, or just classes in general. I think some of the better cultures that I've been within a class, usually I feel like the teachers are very intentional about creating that culture, but not just intentional about creating it. And some of the best ones, the teacher communicated that too. The teacher didn't just try to, manipulate you. Well, not manipulate isn't a good word, but didn't try to just use different activities or something like that to build a culture. They were also very open and honest. And I thought about that when Ben said it with his teacher, where he's like, you said your teacher had a couple of phrases where like, that was what he talked about. He talked about, constructive criticism over and over again, and was very open with what that is. He didn't just model constructive criticism. He also openly spoke about it and said, that's something that I want in my class. So he was open with the type of culture he wanted as well, which I think can help, because sometimes students will pick up if you're just giving good constructive criticism, but it also can help communicating what you want. And then also going with that is what Dr. Malley was saying, I think, is showing your humanness as a teacher, I think is really big as well. And when you don't, as teachers, we're going to mess up, and we're not going to, always follow our own cultural things that we want in our classrooms. And I think it's important to not just call each other out, but to call ourselves out too when we, when we say something, we're like, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't very constructive of me saying that, or maybe not following the own type of culture you want to build, I think can speak volumes.
What would you do to build an atmosphere where students are safe to take chances and experiment?
So I think on some of those, at least for feeling safe and taking chances and experimenting, I think you need to celebrate when things don't go right, but especially, let students know that you're celebrating them taking a chance on something.
So, how would that look? Let's get practical. Got it.
I really like some of those, Justin, that you're talking about there, because I think that's a great way to get students experimenting and feeling more safe about it. But also at the same time, teaching some of those critical thinking and problem solving skills that we were talking about earlier, where they're having to think creatively, because there's not necessarily a simple way of doing that or one right way of doing that.
I'm telling one of my teachers right now, he's been teaching forever, but he's never taught PE ever. And so he's got, he's in his 50s, but he's never taught PE until this year. And I go, one of the things that you have to know is you have to know why you're teaching what you're teaching. It's not we're playing kickball. It's not we're playing tic-tac-toe. It's not, whatever it is. You have to know and be able to explain why you need them to do it the way you have to get it done. And it's not just throw it out there and play a game, because that's just PA. We have to still teach. And he's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, that's, we're still PE teachers. And having the kids up and active and moving is great. But now what are you actively trying to teach them during that process?
For sure. I know just one simple thing that I do in that, along those lines, is I purposely make mistakes when I'm demonstrating. If I'm demonstrating the rules for a game okay, you go here, you shoot a basket, and I missed. Oh, well, what do you do if you miss? Well, you either shoot again or whatever the rules are. Anytime I'm demonstrating, not every time, but quite frequently, I will purposely not do it right the first time. Pick the ball up or do it again, and just show them that's okay. That's what we do in here. It's okay. I don't know. It's very small. It's one of those things, Britton, that it's those things I don't tell them deliberately. Hey, it's okay to make mistakes, but they just will pick that up. Told you he was the idea man. Jamie, this topic is right up your alley. You've been focusing on this. Do you have any concrete examples of ways to build that in? Being safe, to take chances, make mistakes?
I guess big picture wise, it's been putting a more deliberate focus on making sure the kids know that they're teaching them that it's okay to make mistakes. And it is kind of whether it's a learning target or something, that this is what we're trying to accomplish, where we're actually showing we talk about we've got to be a good sport, but actually telling them this is what we're learning right now. We're playing this game to focus on sportsmanship. We're doing this relays, kindergartners, to focus on taking turns, and just putting a more deliberate approach to that. As far as taking chances and things like that, same thing. I use a game called Mission Impossible, and that's one of those games that they have to get across the gym without touching the gym floor. And there's 4 mats, and they're in groups of about 5 or 6, and they just have to come up with different ways. And it is pretty, because I do that in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Where in 3rd grade, you have to give them a little more direction and guidance. And by the time they're 5th graders, you start to add different obstacles and things and challenge their creative thinking, really.
It's more of the Mr. Miyagi type of teaching. What practical things could we encourage teachers to do to have people notice each other.
You know, they see the Chicago Bears bed sheets, like, oh, you're a Bears fan. I'm so sorry.
What would you do in your class to create that culture? Something practical.
I think it would just be, you know, I don't want to use the word calling out, but maybe talking to students by name, not just talking to the screen. Maybe,
Okay.
like I would say, oh, hey, Britton. And I would, I'd state his name, maybe, especially like I said, with those first, like, Britton does with his questions, like the first 5 minutes of class, maybe, help create that culture of just learn your students a bit. For example, like, I swear every teacher would talk about, my microphone or my setup, like and that's something that's part of the culture for me. It's like, that's my culture here that can kind of blend into the culture in the classroom.
Yep.
So they get to learn a little bit more about me, or, like I say,
Hopefully this doesn't insert, but in some of Dr. Malley's classes, like there was a dance class that I've taken, dance and rhythms. And so a lot of the times she would give directions that weren't super specific. So she would say, like, when the music stops, try to stand on 3 different parts of your body on the floor. So she wouldn't tell you, put 2 hands and stand on 1 leg or anything like that. She would just give you a generalized direction like that. So you'd have to think creatively. And then, with that, you can, if you do it correctly, if they come up with something just crazy, you can laugh about it together, but you got to be careful with that. But just celebrating the uniqueness and the just creativity. I think sometimes if you get too specific on instructions, students will do exactly what you want. Or if you even just give too many examples of something, students can end up just doing the examples. That's something I struggle with. If my professors give me an example of something in a class, I really just want to hone in on that example and be like, okay, how can I try to do it like that? So I think, which obviously that can be different at different age levels. Elementary, you're probably going to have to give a little more examples and help them along. Sometimes it can be difficult if you just give it too open-ended. But I think it is letting students feel safe to experiment can start with not being too specific on everything.
Good.
That's too general. Sorry.
No, good. Justin, you are an idea man. Can you add to that idea of building culture where it's safe for take chances and for kids to experiment?
So one of the games that I have my older kids start to play. So 3rd grade, we start to put it in and they have a hard time. And by 6th grade, I'm hoping that they've figured it out. But we put like 6 kids in a line and give them an object and say, okay, you've got to move this object to the other end of the gym. But in the process of doing that, you cannot toss it to anybody next to you. And then once you catch it, you can only take 3 steps. And you have to get all 6 of you in this line and the object to the other end of the gym. And if at any point in time you drop the object, you have to start over. Or if you get to the other end and somebody can't get across the line, your whole group has to go back. And so that really creates that culture of them having to communicate together and come up with plans. And the older kids really have to start thinking about it. And the younger kids don't know how to do that yet. And so that's one of the ways to start trying to get them to think about those things, that things can't just happen, but at the same time, I can't give you every direction.
Yeah. So you're purposely giving them parameters and then saying go. And they're kind of left going, wait, you didn't tell us what to do.
Yeah,
I did.
Now you have to come up with the other, how does this work?
They're learning things without really understanding that they're gaining those things. And you don't have to have a whole separate game for it, but it's just, again, a simple little thing. Christy, go ahead, Jane.
I got to cut in, Stacy, because, one of your questions, first question, Brittany, you had was, what did you tell yourself as a young teacher? And I think one of the main things is you're going to find you're going to find your own way. And that example Stacy gave right there of is actually a difference between Stacy and I. Stacy is more the Mr. Miyagi and has the kids learning, but they really don't know what they're learning. And all of a sudden the light clicks on. Yeah. Where I'm the other way, where this is exactly what we're learning. And there's no right or wrong way. That's just the difference between the two of us. And we're both very successful in our own teaching styles. And what works for me may or may not work for you. What works for Ben may or may not work for you. What works for Justin. And you're creating, you've heard the toolbox thing. You're getting all these tools, and eventually you find what works for you, and develop off your passion and your interest, and your students will feed off that too.
Exactly.
So it's, and so I think every person, like, for example, sometimes Britain's daughter will just kind of climb up on the couch and just steal the show, and that's part of the culture. It's like, some people will have certain things in their background, or they'll be drinking a certain drink, and it's like, so I think it's that, especially in an online scenario, I think that's something that can help build that culture of like, like maybe like, for example, maybe to start a class off, like everybody bring their favorite water bottle or their favorite, for example, like mine right here, it's my health teacher one, even though I don't think I'm going to be a health teacher anymore. But still, it's like, this, like I said, like maybe everybody brings their favorite item. Like, maybe I'd bring a game controller or something else, just so everybody can create that culture both within their home and within the classroom that kind of melded together. Because the absolute differences in the cultures between an online classroom and in a school classroom, like for example, like the most kind of culture you can bring in is maybe the color of your notebook or the color of your shoes for PE class, where now it's like you get to see much further into people's personal lives when it comes to being online. So I just think it's definitely this complete paradigm shift that we got to change.
So you're kind of saying that the idea of distance learning is actually creating an opportunity to know a different side.
Absolutely.
Even maybe in depth more so than we do in person, because we can see your bed sheets, whereas we hopefully not too many people see your bed sheets. And yeah, I went there.
Hopefully not a lot of people see the inside of the bed sheets.
We're not going to ask how many. We're just going to assume not too many people see the Chicago Bear bedspread there. So,
Bears.
But the idea that's an interesting perspective you just brought up, that, hey, distance learning is hard, it's inefficient, it's bad in many ways, but in some ways, as far as noticing each other, we can really notice what's going on around them, what's in the background, what, your dogs, your kids, all those other things that if they came to class, you'd never get to know lots.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for one of my classes, my professor was actually annoyed that we didn't start the class because one of my classmates was just during the class was playing the ukulele. And he's like, that was awesome. And then the next week he goes, why didn't you do that? Like, what's going on? And, actually we had two classmates, they were racing Rubik's Cubes.
Yes.
Like digitally. They're like, well, it's the first 5 minutes of class. We can just kind of have, we can just kind of enjoy ourselves. So they're like, we both have Rubik's Cubes, and they just started going at it. And I started blanking out. I'm like, oh, I can't do this. So it's just that, like, it's like, it's like sometimes like, like I actually, for me, like I can, I was showing off my controller. I can actually find a way to get my game to show up on my screen. So it's like, oh, hey guys, look what I've been playing recently. Has anyone else been playing some video games? Or like, like I said, with the Bears, like like maybe like for my Friday morning class, hey, did anybody see that Thursday night football game? So it's like, I think it's just, we can still bring some of that in-person stuff online. It just has to be in a different format.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like your professors are doing a nice job of allowing that culture to develop. He's not forcing it. He's just allowing.
Absolutely.
The ukulele is there, so he embraced it and said, well, what happened to it? Why isn't it there this week? In other words, I give you permission to do that again. It wasn't a disruption. I like it.
Hey, Stacy, great thing you said quite a while ago, actually, was with regards to culture, was, you don't have to tell me what the culture is in your gym. Just let me watch your class for 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll be able to tell you what that culture is. And I just thought that was really, I'll go ahead and say it, a really profound statement.
Wow. Thank you. But yeah, it is interesting. And when we're doing all this talking about culture, it makes me reminds me of what Ben was telling us about his strength and power or strength coach or whatever it was back in the day. The coach developed a culture around encouraging each other, and he used two words that Ben still remembers today: constructive criticism. He said, I remember him uses that all the time, almost every day. And putting what you just said with that, I was starting to think, well, if you didn't purposefully put words into your culture and to develop a culture, what words do you say over and over that are probably developing a culture in your class? Do you have any ideas of ones that you might not want to include in your culture?
Some of the funny ones that you hear, the ever famous "I'm waiting, I'm waiting."
Yeah, and you say it every day.
Waiting. Yeah, if you're using that, I mean, that's going to become part of your culture.
and when I use that, guess what? I was waiting. I waited a lot until I stopped. I developed the whole plan. That was what I always did to line up. It was just so frustrating. And I would say that line over and over. And finally, I talked to you about it. And we restructured the whole way I do lining up. And I no longer wait, and I no longer have to use those statements.
Another one that kind of makes me, now it makes me cringe now is the famous, you're wasting your time. Like,
yeah, I bet you more than just you has said that.
Oh yeah,
I'm pretty sure. I'm not talking from experience, of course. I'm saying from a friend, I'm sure. But yeah, it would be fun to kind of put that out there on Twitter or whatever and see how many other ideas people.
That's a good idea.
People throw in, because I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but it would be super fun to kind of think about.
But it really feeds into your point of, you're developing a culture one way or the other. So there's a culture being developed there.
Right. And in this discussion, we talked about how important it is to be purposeful and thoughtful about it. And you're going to have that. If you're not, some culture will develop, even if you're not purposeful. And are you gonna take that to risk? But there's some other places that I wanted to touch on where we really dug into the culture of creating an atmosphere where people can make mistakes. And it was mentioned several different ways throughout this discussion about. I think Christy mentioned how we should. She thinks that it's important to be human, show our humanity as a teacher, and that allows for the kids to make mistakes. And others mentioned about being open-ended, not giving all the directions. Do you recall some of those things that hit you as part of that discussion?
Yeah, and that's truthfully, that's my focus this year. As part of the social emotional learning is just creating that culture, that environment where it's okay for kids to make mistakes, where kids can keep trying. I guess an example I would give, take basketball, where if the kid shoots an air ball and everybody laughs, that student, we've ruined that child's basketball experience. But if the kid shoots an air ball and we encourage them and we help them by moving them closer, lowering the basket, giving them a different ball, but giving them more opportunities. And let's say they miss 500 times in a row, but finally they make it. And then and now we celebrate with them. That's just the difference in the environment that we created versus laughing at a student, celebrating with the student. To me, that's just super powerful.
Yeah. No, and I like that. You have to be purposeful in that, because it could happen that the group of students you have would naturally reach out and be encouraging. But do you want to leave that to chance? Is kind of the question.
And that's a great point.
It's let's be purposeful about some of these things. And going back to that coach that Ben had, and Britton kind of highlighted it in his statements, where he just nailed those two words. And if you got it down to two words, we think about PBIS. Those people have been trained in PBIS in their buildings. They tell you narrow it down to 3, maybe 4 at the max types of things. At St. Francis, we're respectful, responsible, and safe. Boom, 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 and all the way down to kindergarten, they got it.
Mhm.
Not only can they repeat it, but you just start the phrase, and they kind of get calm, and it changes their attitude. If they were wild and crazy, just starting that phrase starts to bring them back into, oh yeah, this is who we are. This is the culture we have at St. Francis. I really think it's important just to narrow it down and keep it really simple.
And truthfully, with that in mind, especially when you take a building-wide PBIS, respectful, responsible, and in my building, we're respectful, responsible, cooperative, and safe. It's just the impact that a fire department can have on setting a culture, not just for your gym, but for the school as a whole, because you have the opportunity and the responsibility to reinforce that with all the kiddos. So, I mean, there again, it comes to what can you do for the school? And right there it is. I mean, you can set the culture, you can complement exactly what the school is trying to accomplish.
No, that's huge. I'm glad you brought that up. That again, it's just changing the outlook of what impact PE can have. We're not just there to relieve teachers of their students for an hour while they have prep. We can really have an impact not on just on the culture in our buildings, but in our gym, but the whole building. I'm glad you brought that up. It just almost takes a mental mindset shift to really plan on being that influential, throughout the whole building. So to kind of wrap this thing up and think back, there's a whole bunch of different topics that we touched on, and it was a great discussion. But I think the part that just stuck out to me the most was what you led with in this section. You talked about a culture will develop in our gyms. The question for our PE community, I guess, from Thinking PE is this: will you be purposeful and proactive to develop that culture, or are you just going to leave it to chance and let it happen?
And that is Thinking PE.
Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at Thinking PE. Find us on all your favorite podcast providers by searching Thinking PE. For more resources and videos, go to www.thinkingpe.com. Thanks for listening.